And a very good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining for this media conference. As you know, Prime Minister the Honorable Amor Mottley is attending the Global Climate Conference COP26 and will be joining us virtually from Brussels. Because of the time difference, we say a very good evening, Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Lisa. And I smiled when local press. I think that when we went to New York, I would have indicated that it was important for us to be able to keep Barbadians au fait, up to date with all that we're doing. And I feel that it is necessary, therefore, having completed a number of days of meetings, to be able to brief you as to where we are and what this means for all of us. I think there's no secret that we have used the word climate crisis so many times that people hear it, but I'm also not sure that people appreciate what it means. Um, Over the last 30 years, the world has been recognizing that there is a significant amount of warming in the atmosphere caused by the greenhouse gases. And these gases really come from the things that we do that have caused it, whether it is the burning of fossil fuels, be it coal, be it oil, even sometimes the cleaner ones, whether it is in our agricultural practices. We've learned, for example, that some of our agricultural practices produce the methane gases that also help to contribute to the warming of the earth. Many of us have seen pictures of the glaciers melting, but even as we saw them, it really didn't have the kind of impact that it might otherwise have had on us. But many of us have experienced a number of things in the last few years. We've experienced the fact that, as I keep saying, we no longer see certain types of marine life. We don't see cobblers, we don't see sea eggs in the same way. All of this is as a result of changes in our marine environment. We've seen the destruction of our coral reefs. Many of the fellas on the West Coast can tell you. You know I like to swim, so you know I'm going to be able to tell you that too. We've also seen significant increases in areas flooding that were not flooding before, largely because of different types of rainfall. I think you've heard the Chief Met Officer, Sabu Bess, being far more explanatory in recent times, explaining to us what is happening with respect to either prolonged periods of drought or, on the other hand, sharp, short showers that lead to extreme instances of flash flooding. And we've seen it, whether it has had impact in Speightstown, whether it has had an impact in Murphy's Pasture, even in my own constituency in Bush Hall on the main road. The flash flooding is a problem when you get 2, 3, 4 inches within an hour or 90 minutes. And in fact, I've said on a number of occasions recently that we're experiencing something that previously I was only accustomed to in the region in Jamaica or in Miami, which are the convection showers in the evening, afternoon, sorry, short, sharp showers because of the increased heat. In addition to that, we've also seen the extent to which groundwater crises has meant, and all of us know it only too well. People in St. Joseph, the people in St. John, the people in St. Lucie, the people in St. Peter, sometimes parts of St. George, all have complained, parts of St. Michael, about the absence of water. And that's a combination of both a shortage of groundwater and equally also the pipes, of course, being needed to be replaced. But if you have to spend money on augmenting water resources, then it takes away from the money that you can spend on replacing water mains because there's only a limited pot of money at the end of the day. So I've gone back to contextualize all of this because whether it is the coastal issues, which, in addition to the erosion that we're seeing, and many of us know that Glen Burnie and St. John, we've seen parts of Glen Burnie fall into the sea. We've also seen significant shifting of lands in the Scotland district. We only need to look at the roads to know why we are on the verge of signing a major loan with the Chinese government with respect to the rehabilitation of our Scotland district roads, and we've talked about it, 115 million US, or whether it is with respect to the stories that you guys have carried about houses on the precipice in St. Simon's and Saviour's, or in White Hill, which hopefully will be one of the major roads to benefit from the Chinese road project and the stabilization necessary there too. All of these things are interrelated. And it therefore means that the country that we know is facing challenges in a way that when we were growing up, certainly as a teenager in my 20s, in my early entry into public life, we knew that the possibility existed, but the reality of those crises were not yet upon us in a way that they were contemplated to be. In this year of our Lord, we have seen the existence of a freak storm, the likes of which we never saw. And when I explain it to people and I tell them that we had 46,000 lightning strikes in about a 90-minute period, everyone pauses and they just can't contemplate what that means. And you have to try to tell them that it is almost like having metallic white constant, almost like a continuous strobe light. And then you get the bowels of the earth almost opening up with the thunder coming from there as opposed to the claps of thunder from the sky. We begin to understand that something wrong and something different is happening. And 2 weeks later, of course, Hurricane Elsa. And Hurricane Elsa, coming on the heels of that freak storm, led to, of course, over 540 Barbadians being in a position where their homes have to be rebuilt. That process is being undertaken, and about 2,000 house repairs having to be undertaken. We're doing all of this while trying to fight a pandemic. And we're doing all of this while trying to fight an inherited situation that left us with increased debt and that we had to literally restructure while building back out our productive sectors. And of course, consequential in the pandemic was the loss of jobs in tourism in particular, which cascaded into other sectors like the retail sector, like the farmers, etc. It is against that backdrop, my friends, that we are now fighting the battles of our lives. And that is why coming to Glasgow was not an option, but is absolutely an obligation and part of our duty. Our country is 166 square miles, 430 square kilometers. And it is only therefore in the increase in both the policy choices that we can use, as well as the opportunity to access funding. And let me break it down in simple Bajan terms. If you're living next door to somebody and that person continually dumping into your yard a whole set of stuff, and you can't sleep or function properly because the stuff is either getting into the house or it smells so bad that you got to remove it. You have to spend money to remove it. But the money that you need to spend is the money you were using to pay the rent or the mortgage, is the money you were using to buy food, is the money you were using to be able to buy the medication that you needed that you couldn't necessarily get before. So that all of a sudden, with the same money, you now have to deal with a problem that somebody else created for you. Then you will better understand where Barbados and the other small island developing states, whether in the Caribbean or in the Indian Ocean or the Pacific Ocean, find themselves in. And we have seen what it is to be able to see other countries completely decimated by these weather events. And even though Barbados has benefited from being the most easterly, we all learned it in school, we're the most easterly Caribbean island. And some even say we're in the Atlantic Ocean, not the Caribbean Sea. We are now facing our moment in time. And 2021 has shown us that in very, very clear terms. Add to that, yes, a volcanic eruption in St. Vincent, which is not necessarily as a result of climate, but which nevertheless has had a deleterious impact on us because it meant then that access to water became a premium event which we had to manage. And as a result, coming out of April, you may recall, there were 8 parishes that were facing water shortages for a couple of weeks because of the increased demand for water in fighting the ash. I say all of this because when I spoke to the Chamber of Commerce, was it last week or a week before? I can't remember now. I made the point last week that the mental landscape of Barbadians, whether it be households or businesses, has to change. And why? Let me break it down. The United Nations formed a committee that was designed to be able to examine what is the impact of climate on all that we're doing. Many of you may not be aware that we've actually been at the table for a number of decades. In fact, Dr. Hugh Seeley has been one of the negotiators in the Article 6 Paris Convention framework that we've been trying to complete for the last few years. Ambassador Liz Thompson has been on the front line of helping to be able to do a lot of these discussions. But the one major thing that has changed in the last 10 to 15 years is that we're now facing the effects of the climate crisis on an ongoing basis. And that is why we are here to be able to deal with some of the issues, because we're not going to be able to find the resources to stabilize the Scotland district or to stabilize the households who live on the precipices, on the cliffs, whether it is in St. Simon, St. Saviour's, as I said, or in White Hill or in Glen Burnie, without being able to find access to both the technical and financial resources to make sure that their lives can be stabilized. People who have lived there for decades, and in some instances, their families have been there as far back as the 19th century. This is really what is at stake now. And this country, our country, needs to be able to approach this with courage, but with common sense. And Barbadians, I know, have an abundance of common sense. There's true that there are some who may want to confuse it with the silly season, but if we cut those things out of it, Barbadians have an abundance of common sense. The bottom line is that when we met across the world, we agreed, as recent as Paris, that we needed to take actions that will allow those countries on the front line to be able to, one, access money for loss and damage. Regrettably, that has never been fleshed out. And that's what Dr. Seeley is in Glasgow helping to do now for us with other members of the team, trying to see how we can create a mechanism for a fair assessment for loss and damage. At the same time in Paris, we understood and put very clearly on the table that the increase in global temperatures, and I'm going to ask the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation to start, as well as other members of the media, to start giving context and to educate Barbadians to show you that really it is since the Industrial Revolution that there has been an absolute increase in the temperatures of the climate of the planet. And it is that exponential increase that now has us in trouble. We are now 1.2 degrees above what it was at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. We have said that if we reach 1.5, it is going to be hell and murder for the Caribbean people. That's why you heard me say on Monday morning that it is a death sentence for small island developing states. We've already seen islands in the Pacific Ocean being threatened. We've seen islands in the Caribbean being threatened. We've seen locusts, which is of biblical proportion, affecting the people of Africa, particularly East Africa. We've seen Mozambique hurled from floods and hurricanes in a way that they've never seen. We've seen countries in Africa and the Caribbean suffer from drought. And let's come home to our own country. Barbados, when I came into public life, we always knew that we were a water scarce country. But the extent to which it has gotten worse has been at a significant pace in the last few years. That is why we are encouraging people to be able to use water conservation devices. That is why I have been so hard on the Barbados Water Authority for not moving with alacrity in being able to establish the fund that will allow Barbadians to be able to benefit from the access to water conservation devices. You need toilets that flush using the water-saving devices so you don't spend 8, 9 gallons, 6 gallons flushing, but much less. You need shower heads that can help conserve water. And we as individuals need to change our behavior. And that's the major task in the next few years that we're going to have to educate from our children right back up. Just as we don't want people to litter, we also need people to do a number of things to save our planet and to save our communities. And we're going to have to roll out those things because it's not just about getting the developed world, who, yes, are the ones that have caused the problem primarily. But even though we are small, you know, we have a saying, everybody knows it. One blow is kill old cow. And if one blow is kill old cow, it means therefore that the actions of each and every Barbadian matter in terms of how we make the transition. And it is important for me to say this because I cannot, with credibility, be speaking to the international community about what they must do to help us avert the 1.5 degree, or alternatively, if we meet it, to help us deal with the adaptation, how we must adapt to living in it, without speaking to us about what we must do in our household and our family to make the differences. So whether it is as simple as turning off the water tap when you're brushing your teeth, or recognizing that 15-minute showers really can't cut it no more when there is limited water, those are the kinds of small things that go right back up to the national level. Why is coastal conservation, the Coastal Conservation Commission, spending all the money in the studies and doing all the coastal works that they need to do? Because if we get salt water into the aquifers that we have, for example, that we're already seeing at the Hope in St. Lucie, at Allendale, at Ashton Hall in St. Peter, at the Women in St. Peter, at Haymans in St. Peter, at Carlton in St. James, at Molyneux in St. James. All of these things would affect us, because once the salt water goes into those aquifers, then those aquifers can no longer generate the level of fresh water that we need to supply the people living in St. Lucie, St. Peter, St. James, and in some instances affecting St. Joseph and St. Andrew because of the distribution systems. That is why the government has just spent $16 million or $17 million, I don't have the exact figure before me, with respect to Vineyard in St. Philip and being able to get water to the people in St. Joseph. But all of these things cost money. And this is not money that we had intended to spend in this way, because we want to be able to do the other developmental things for Barbadians. But you can't do them if you don't meet the basic needs of people with respect to water and food. We're also going to see the impact of the climate on the capacity of the world to be able to generate enough food for everybody. And that's why I've said, apply your hearts to common sense. In this going down, we need to be able to make sure that we can pursue food and nutritional security. And that is why I'm talking, every speech I've given in the last few weeks is about changing the mental landscape, changing our approach to how we live, and recognize that we have to be hopeful, we have to create our own future, we have to earn our own money, but we have to be cognizant that the things we took for granted in the first 55 years as an independent country are not the things that we can continue to take for granted. And that this is not a governmental problem. It's not even a national problem, it's a global problem. And to that extent, all of us across the world have to play our part if ultimately we are going to be able to ensure that our children and our children's children can live on this planet in a way that is sustainable and that does not cause them this serious dislocation and, in fact, to become climate migrants across the world. The last government did something called, and I want to thank them for it, because this is not about partisan politics, no. The National Coastal Risk Information Planning Platform, that initially was undertaken with the Inter-American Development Bank, where the Coastal Conservation Commission, Dr. Brewster and them, and what that has done is to allow us to be able to make judgments about what is the risk that communities will face. We're updating it, and that costs money for us to update it as well. But what does it mean? It means that we can look at Fontebelle, for example, in St. Michael, and know that the major problem in Fontebelle is not going to be wind, Gershine. It's not going to be wind down by you, by the nation. It's going to be flooding. But you didn't need me to tell you that, because you all know that out there will flood just like that. And what we're trying to do is to be able to assess district by district by district what the particular vulnerabilities are, what the particular risk is. And that is why we have to be able also, and I use the word vulnerability deliberately, because that is why we have to be able to make the case, because if not, we're not going to access the funding that's necessary to do the adjustments. The coastal erosion, as I said, continues also to be a problem. I talked about Glen Burnie, but we could as easily talk about the west coast of Barbados. And we've seen many of the Barbadians tell you that they've lost property into the sea. We've seen also on the villas and the hotel properties saying that their attraction is compromised because where they may have had beaches 10, 15, 20 years ago is now rock. And how do you sell a tourism property without access to the beach when the property is on the beach? It's as simple as that. So all of these things are there. I can go to the sargassum seaweed as well, and we should feel very proud as a country because two Barbadian scientists have done an excellent paper. In fact, one of them is in Scotland as well, on the sargassum seaweed and the location from which the sargassum comes. As you know, it is affecting predominantly the northeastern, eastern, southeastern coast. Sometimes we get it on the west coast, but we have to knock wood that it has not been as bad on the west coast as it has been on the east coast. But having said that, Barbados has entities who depend on a living on the east coast too. And that is why you see from the Crane Hotel right back up to River Bay, people complaining. And of course, we all know what the East Coast Road looks like. The Ministry of Maritime Affairs and Blue Economy tries to clean it up. But how do you get ahead of each wave bringing in sargassum weed, second by second by second by second? By tomorrow morning, you have potentially 2, 3 feet, 4 feet of sargassum weeds stinking and smelling up the place because of the toxicity. So you ask me why I spend all this time breaking it down. Because I need you in the media to do it for us now too. I need the ministries to do it. I need the churches to do it. I need the community groups to do it. I need the cricketing groups that are accustomed playing cricket every weekend, but want to know why sometimes they may not be able to get a chance to play good again because of waterlogged or drought events that may cause problems. And if, as you know, the Water Authority has had to ban in the past people watering their grounds or areas. If water is scarce, then you're going to apply it to where its greatest need is, which is human beings and animals, before you apply it to leisure and sporting activities. This, my friends, is what is at stake. And whether in our schools, our communities, the rum shops, the churches, our liming gatherings, we now have to apply our hearts to this. Many people curse Kirk Humphrey when we first put the ban on plastics. You have to do it because it's destroying the marine life. We're talking now about working with our fishermen, and I believe Minister Humphrey will roll out a plan that he's been negotiating and working with them to see how best we can both protect their livelihoods while protecting the marine area that we have. So that, in essence, represents the context against which we've been trying now to have some discussions. And what are those discussions that we've been having up here? And you heard me say, one, I'm very honored on behalf of the people of Barbados to have been given the opportunity to participate in the opening ceremony. But it wasn't only on behalf of the people of Barbados, it's on behalf of all small island developing states and those countries in the world that lie between the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn. We have said that we are the canaries in the small island developing states, but no one listened to us initially. So it has now spread itself, and you've heard me talk about what has happened in Africa and Central America, Latin America, etc., and even coastal US. How many of you ever heard of New York being subject to hurricanes and people dying in basements from flooding, as happened with Hurricane Elsa when it hit New York 3-4 months ago? How many people? Or Hurricane Sandy or Katrina? In fact, today I was reflecting that prior to Hurricane Andrew, there really was not the notion of hurricanes going into the US, but yet the United States of America is the one country in the world that is going to always be hit every year now. And we've seen it year after year. But here's the difference. They don't suffer wipeout risk. We do. In other words, when Hurricane Katrina hit, and I see you nodding, Gershine, when Hurricane Katrina hit, it only caused less than 1% of GDP damage to the United States of America. But when Maria hit Dominica, it was 227% of everything that they produced damaged in one day. Or let's look at Dorian, where Barbados was so lucky. Remember, we were up at the RSS and people laughed at me cooking corned beef and white rice tonight, and tuna and white rice. And we went outside waiting for the rain and waiting for the breeze. And what came? Not an ounce of rain, because we learned that the Sahara dust had sucked everything out of the system. That same system that spared Bajans went 1 week later to the day over the Bahamas and sat for 2 days, 48 hours. When last in our history we ever hear about a hurricane stalling and stopping? We hear about a hurricane passing over. we hear about a hurricane stalling and stopping over Bahamas, and it flattened. And as you recall, I went there with Prime Minister Chasney and other prime ministers in the region, and it literally flattened Abaco as if a nuclear bomb had hit on Grand Bahama. So, bottom line is that we have said, look, we need to be able to ask you in the world, please increase your ambitions to see if you can get to 1.5 degrees and let us cap it there. Because as we've said, in the Eastern Caribbean, 1.5 to survive. Regrettably, it does not look as though we might necessarily be the most successful person. And Beijing should take pride in one other thing. One of the key advisors to the United Nations Secretary General is our previous ambassador and former Foreign Service Officer, Selwyn Hart, who has been doing yeoman service in being able to advance the policy framework, not of Barbados, of course, but of all small island developing states and all countries that are now affected by the climate crisis. We also, therefore, put on the table, if you're not going to meet the 1.5, because we're people of practical affairs, let us start to discuss how we're going to adapt, because we got to live. We can't just cock up and dead. You got to live. And to that extent, therefore, what are you going to put on the table to allow us to be able to, one, halt the coastal erosion that's taking place, two, deal with the whole question of saltwater incursion into our wells, and if that happens, where are we going to get the fresh water from? Are we going to have to build the desal plants? The last government negotiated 2 desal plants. We've started the process of saying, look, we want the plants, but we believe that one, the volume that the last government asked for at 6 million gallons is way beyond what we can take now and what we need now. And therefore, we will need to renegotiate both quantum as well as pricing, because we believe that the pricing was excessive, and we believe also that the quantum, which therefore meant we would pay more because it's a take or pay contract that the last government negotiated, means that whether you use it or not, you pay for everything from day one. We have established a college of negotiators headed by, I think, Mr. Anthony Ordain, along with our White Oak, our advisors, and other people to be able to renegotiate those contracts. But what it means is that we need to be able to protect our access to safe drinking potable water, whether that comes from groundwater sources or whether that comes as a result of desalination. We've also recognized that we need to do it in a way that is affordable and that uses renewable energy, because one of the main reasons for the high cost of desal water is in fact the electricity cost, because of how intensely how intense the use of electricity is in the process of desal water. Secondly, we have also said that we need to be able to deal with the issue of drains and flooding. You know that we've been working on Murphy Pasture. And I keep making the point. When I was 4 years old, 5 in fact, just turned 5, Barbados had the 1970 floods. And I to this day remember my father coming home. He was Member of Parliament for the city of Bridgetown, and his giving us the stories of having to go down Baxter's Road in a Moses in order to be able to help save people coming out of those floods in 1970. Dame Billy Miller did a good job in moving some of them before, and then in no time at all, people moved back into the area. We are now trying to fix the problem in a permanent way, but at the same time relocate those persons in those few houses who are on the bank of the canal and who may not be able to go there. Thirdly, we also said that, look, we need to deal with other areas where the flooding is taking place. In Watton, we've continued to have flooding problems. In Speightstown, we've had flooding problems. In Brandon's, that's where we have to keep the mouth of the canal as it goes down from out there by Brandon's across to the ocean. That's money every time. And it's because of these short, sharp showers. And I really want to commend the Chief Meteorological Officer, Sabu Best. Up to last night, he was indicating to us the possibility of how we prepare. Because if we have a drought as potentially as possible in the early part of January, February, March, then that carries completely different consequences for the agricultural sector as we seek to pursue food and nutritional security. At the same time, we also have had to do significant work in Whole Town. And I think you know that with the benefit of assistance from the United States government through USAID, that has continued. We're almost finished. In fact, we took the United Nations Secretary General. That was one of the things we showed him in terms of the work that we did there. Many of you know that we then completed it with Highway 1 and the work that we did on the drainage system there, and the culverts, and being able to use both green and gray approaches. That's why when you pass, you see almost like a concave drop right there in Holt Town, below Cave Shepherd, going right down to the Chapel House Village, and you see how the grass is there. And then under the road, you have the concrete tunnels that take it to this. And we also took the head of the Green Climate Fund, who was in Barbados the beginning of last week, in order for him to see, because we're going to need to work with them to access funding, not just for the public sector, but the private sector. I hope I'm not giving you information overload, but I really feel moved to talk the country through these things, because if ever there was a time that we got to pause and get it right, it is now, my people, because what faces us, especially in the next 12 to 15 years, can be very grim. And it may be as early as 10 years. But guess what? If it was that everything was going to happen 10 years from now or 12 years from now, I wouldn't even mind so much. But it is happening each and every month, each and every day along the 10 to 12 years that you are going to have to get and use till you get to the 1.5. So that as you try to avoid the worst, you're facing problems and obstacles almost on an annual basis, as we have seen this year. I spoke about coastal, I spoke about flooding. The other area, of course, relates to the question of water. And we knew from the beginning that water is going to take the greatest claim on our public sector investment program as a government. We knew it, and we've not been proven wrong. And that's why, as I said, with the desal plants, we have to get it right. When last I did the budget, I spoke about the water conservation devices. I mentioned why I am a little disappointed that Water Authority has not moved with greater alacrity. But in fairness to them, they're managing on so many other fronts. And I know that there are people in St. Joseph and Horsehill and Lambings, etc., who were not getting water at all. You in the media know it because you carry the stories almost daily and weekly, but they're getting water now. So that it is not that we can't solve the problems, but here's the deal. In solving the problems, I've got to spend much more money. We've got to spend much more money than we've ever spent before. And that puts at risk your fiscal situation. So the next meetings that we had, and the British government invited us and had a meeting called Action and Solidarity, the critical decade, which had just under 25 countries or so from the developed and developing world. We were able to make the point as to why we can no longer have GDP per capita income. In other words, how rich you are as a country or how poor you are as a country, determining whether you need to borrow money or not in order to fix these things. And we go further. We said, not only can you not use that, you've got to use vulnerability. If I am the one on the front line, and I am the one facing the damage, and I am caused the damage, oh, you can tell me I can't borrow. And that is what the World Bank did to us, because they graduated us, they graduated the Bahamas, and they said, guess what? You guys can't borrow at concessional rates. Go to the capital markets and borrow at the larger amounts. And that is why this significant number of downgrades, 23 downgrades, affected Barbados' ability to be able to borrow money and to be able to invest and fix some of these problems over the last 12, 13 years. Of course, once we restructured our debt, we put ourselves in a position where we have access to the funding. But we also want to be able to make sure that we can have the right funding at the right cost. And that is why we've said to the opposition and others that, look, the IMF is still the cheapest capital in town. In fact, there's an IMF mission going on now as I speak with you. And you will soon see that in spite of the pandemic and in spite of the significant double-digit decline in our economy, that we have pretty much tried to keep up with our program. And why? Because while we came to office with 4 weeks of import cover, we now have just short of 40 weeks of import cover. I want to repeat myself. And why do you need that import cover? to fix the drains, to fix the coastal work, to fix the water work. Almost everything we need has to be imported. And if you have to import it, that's foreign exchange. So if you don't have the foreign reserves, and you don't have the confidence of the market to lend you money, or the international financial institutions to lend you money, you can't do anything with it. So we've been arguing that, look, we need to access money on the basis of vulnerability, and that is a significant criteria that we need. At the same time, because of the increase in debt, there is no country in the world that has not increased its debt since the pandemic. No country. And therefore, the voices at home that tell you about debt, we brought our debt down from 177% debt to GDP to 118% or about. And the fact that it is up to 145 or so again is not because Barbados went on a spending spree. It is because our size of our economy contracted because it's a debt to GDP ratio. So that the size of the economy contracting was responsible for the majority of the increase. And that is why we've had no problems, because people understand what is happening. And to that extent, therefore, it is important that we succeed in being able to have vulnerability, at the very least, seen as an essential criterion. But if not, what we really want ultimately is a multidimensional vulnerability index that looks at our vulnerability to economic shocks. Look at the price of oil. The price of oil is going up again. And that means that we got to look for more foreign exchange to buy the same volume of oil. And that's why we have to convert to renewable energy. And that is why I've said to Minister Simmons that he has to introduce, which I believe that we're completing now, the revised framework, because the whole process of approving renewable energy projects is taking way too long. Similarly, we've also said that, look, we need to look at how we're going to access funding that is not debt. It's not debt. And why? David Thompson, 1994, brought the World Trade Organization agreement to Parliament, and Barbados committed itself to it, as most countries in the world, and we're not complaining with him for that at all. But because we no longer could protect the garment industry that used to be on the Harbour Road, Gershine, because we could no longer protect the agricultural sector that used to be able to put in place licenses and non-tariff barriers from people being able to import any and everything, it meant that our agricultural sector, our farming community, and our manufacturing sector both became victims within a decade. And Owen Arthur knew it, and you can go back and look at many of his speeches when he made the point that the entry into the WTO and the absence of us getting the international community to agree that we needed special and differential treatment so that we could do things differently to protect our agricultural sector or to protect our manufacturing and jobs. That if we didn't have that, we'd be exposing ourselves to the full frontal winds of all of these things. And there are many who can confirm this, including people at the university like Don Marshall, who likes to speak about a strong, robust industrial manufacturing sector again. But he knows, as do all of us, that the policy options were removed in 1994. And in fairness, Prime Minister Thompson was then Minister Thompson. He knew that there would be a risk, but small countries could not stay out of the mix that easily. And to that extent, therefore, the debt continued and the claim to debt started to rise. After 9/11, they had Resolution 1393. Go back and do the research and see all of the obligations we had to put in place to deal with our regulatory sector, which meant spending more money, and we continue to have to do it, whether to deal with the OECD or the FA Financial Action Task Force list, because we need to be able to transform in order for us not to be sanctioned by the international community or the European Union with respect to those matters, and therefore undermine further our competitiveness in the international business sector. These things were all the subject of discussions, because without that, we cannot get through and turn the corner. We cannot take debt, no matter how much money you put on the table, as available to us at concessional resources, if some of it is not grant money, if some of it is not for the private sector to be able to participate, then we're not going to get through. And how do we get the private sector to participate? In many instances, the private sector has said, oh, I ain't ready to do this or I ain't ready to do that. The risk is too great. Guess what? We discussed with the Green Climate Fund, and we discussed here in Glasgow again with the British and with the other meetings I'll detail very shortly to you, that we need to be able to have new instruments that will allow our private sector and the international private sector to help us in the effort of adapting to this new reality, to protect the Barbadian houses. And I ain't get the house rules yet, to protect the Barbadian houses, to protect the Barbadian water, to protect the Barbadian communities from flooding, and to protect from the coastal erosion. And what are some of those instruments? That we may have to find a way of providing guarantees that are not sovereign guarantees, because we can't carry it on our balance sheet because of the debt. And I'm not talking about Barbados alone, all small island developing states. We may need also to be able to put in and let people come in with private equity, like the Green Climate Fund. In other words, they can hold some shares in the enterprise, but if the enterprise fails, they're prepared to take the first loss, rather than you as the private sector person being up front for the first loss. So what you're really doing is putting in inducements, putting in things, that little sweetener, to make it easier for the local private sector and the international private sector to step up to the plate. So it is not only government borrowing and government increasing its debt to GDP. I hope that I'm making sense. And if I'm not, any of you can stop and let me clarify something. Because as I said, this is less a news event for reporting, but more an event of talking Bajans through what we are facing. And we're going to have a lot more of that going forward. Perhaps not as long as today, but the truth is that a lot has happened in the last few days that I need to brief you on. We then had the opportunity, and in these events, it is the opportunity to network with global leaders that is as important as anything else. And on Monday night, we had a reception only for prime ministers and presidents. And of course, that is where President Biden and myself, not the picture you saw, were able to speak for the first time at length. A number of presidents and prime ministers across Europe and Africa and Latin America. In fact, I think we will hopefully, and this is where I want to pause, because everybody feels that we go there acting as a one person. The Caribbean and the Caribbean community has acted collectively in this. And I want to use the opportunity to signal out Prime Minister Gaston Brown, who is chairman of the Caribbean Community and chairman of the Alliance of Small Island States, and doing a very, very strong and effective job along with the rest of us to be able to put our case. We were able as well to be able to have President Irfan Ali, who, as you know, has been very passionate and has recently been in Barbados. And on these issues, even though Guyana has elements of oil and gas, for future, Guyana has been one of the biggest green carbon sinks with its forests, and the deal that it did with Norway under President Jagdeo, as he then was a couple of years ago. Prime Minister Rowley was also there. Prime Minister Philip Pierre from St. Lucia, and of course Prime Minister Andrew Holness from Jamaica, and Prime Minister John Braceno from Belize, and all of us, and Prime Minister Davis from Bahamas, all of us have worked together, because believe you me, this battle is not even enough. All of us are not enough to carry this battle alone. And that is why we pray and aid our international partners and friends, whether they be in Africa, whether they be in Europe, whether they be in Latin America. President of Costa Rica, Carlos Quesada, I've had another set of bilaterals, and we're working extremely closely with Costa Rica, both on debt issues as well as on the climate crisis issues. The president of Argentina, similarly, has agreed that they want to work with us, as well as the president of Colombia, with respect to food security, food and nutritional security issues. And we are hopeful that Prime Minister Brown will organize with the president of Colombia an encounter in early December for us to be able to deal with some of these issues going forward. In addition to that, President of Ghana continues to work very closely with us, as well as the President of Kenya. And we had an opportunity also to meet with the international heads of international organizations from the World Trade Organization. Minister Jerome Walcott is one of two vice chair in the ministerial conference coming up for the World Trade Organization, on which so much hangs at the end of November. And Barbados is happy once again to build on the excellent work of Ambassador Chad Blackman and his team in Geneva to allow us to be able to play that role with respect to the WTO. With respect to other issues, the president of Namibia, I'm happy that we were able also to share with them the research and work ongoing with green and blue hydrogen, because one of the things that we made clear as well is that we need to be able to ensure that in the same way that Guyana has used the forests to be able to have and act as a green carbon sink, that we need to be able to see how best we can work with our ocean, the Caribbean Sea, because the ocean is 433 times Barbados' size. After that encounter, we met also, and I'm happy that we were able, I met twice on Monday with His Royal Highness Prince Charles, and I think that I'll be speaking to you more about our relationship and what we're doing going forward very shortly, and I'll come back to that on another day. Similarly, we then went, and Prime Minister Johnson and myself were able to speak as well. And one of the things that Barbados has been discussing with the Prime Minister of Denmark, the President of Kenya, and the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom is how we can work collectively towards being able to get the offshore wind farms off the ground. We are committed to at least 3 of them, whether floating or fixed, and we are committed now to working with a group of persons. I was also able to meet with the President of the European Investment Bank yesterday, Mr. Hoyer, and we've indicated to them that we would want them to work together with us as we seek to work with those countries to see how we can benefit from their technical assistance and their participation in an area of activity that is new to us, quite frankly. And let's be frank, Barbados has spent, 20 years talking about a wind farm at Lambert's, and we ain't get it off the ground. Well, my friend, we got less than 20 years left. In fact, we got 4 or 5 years to get the offshore wind farms off the ground, and we need to be able to deal with 1 or 2 on land. We accept that because the land space is so small, that it is really the offshore ones that are really going to drive us going forward. On Tuesday morning, we were very, very happy to attend a meeting with the President of the United States of America and the President of the European Union on the Build Back Better World initiative. And I think that the early part of that program would have been public. Both President Biden's and President von der Leyen's and Prime Minister Johnson's statements were made public. What was perhaps less known is that there were very few countries in the meeting. The Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Japan, the new Prime Minister of Japan, the President of Colombia and Ecuador, the Presidents of Nigeria and the Democratic Republic of Congo, and then the President of the World Bank and the advisor of the Secretary General on Climate Finance, Mark Carney, the former head of the Central Bank of the United Bank of England. And then, of course, the Minister of Ecological Affairs from Italy, representing Prime Minister Draghi, the Prime Minister of Italy. And then, of course, Prime Minister Modi, who I was able to thank yet again for his very generous gift of vaccines to us going forward. That meeting was extremely important. And I want to publicly thank Prime Minister Trudeau and President von der Leyen, because originally Barbados was not supposed to speak. But when we spoke, we were able to put on the table very clearly the need for small island developing states to have an urgent review of the international financial architecture, as well as the instruments. And for the reasons I outlined to you just now, because heavily indebted countries cannot easily access more debt, especially when they're accessing the debt to spend on pollution not created by them or warming not created by them. And I believe that President Biden and the President of the European Union are in a better position to understand our perspective And certainly they were very, very warm. I think many of you laughed at the picture of President Biden holding my hand. That came after that meeting. And we were able in the afternoon again to have the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, to meet with the Pacific island states, the island states in the Indian Ocean and the Caribbean. And we thank the US Secretary of State for that meeting. President Biden came in at the beginning again and shouted out the rest, who he had not necessarily seen in the morning. And therefore, we were able to put on the table. That meeting was to have lasted an hour. It lasted 2.5 hours because we were very clear about what needed to happen. And in fact, there is a press briefing that Prime Ministers Brown, Holness, Pierre, and myself did. And I've asked the CBC to be able to carry it for you later this week, because it gives you a sense of the flavor of what we are all facing. In fact, Prime Minister Palau made it very clear, and it is the one statement that has stuck with me all week. And he said then, you could as well bomb us. And that is how dread what we are facing is. You could as well bomb us. Bottom line is, that morning we also met, the Alliance of Small Island States, met to be able to realign and to refine our positions for our actions as we engage the developed world on these matters. And then we had a separate meeting with His Excellency Antonio Guterres, again, United Nations Secretary General, who I really need to say, Barbadians, if ever there was a person defending the rights of small island developing states, it is the Secretary General of the United Nations. And we have to publicly call out and support him, as each of us has done, Prime Minister Brown, Prime Minister Holness, myself, because it is so unusual to have the kind of backative, the collective support that comes from as high a person as he is, without any fear of wondering what is in it or what's the agenda, straight down the line, because he understands that the world is facing an existential crisis. That we continued and also met with the president of COP, Ambassador Elizabeth Thompson, and myself and officials to be able to take stock. And it is at that meeting we understood that even within the last 48 hours, or the first 48 hours of the meeting, we started to see movement and progress on the part of some countries. We're not yet where we want to be, but we are now in a position to reflect the fact that the adaptation funding is at about 40%. We have asked, as you heard in my speech, a 50-50 split between what we do to mitigate the impact of climate and what we do to adapt to learning to live with it. And as I said, we need to be able to learn to live with it because we don't have time on our side. I've left Scotland and I'm in Brussels now, as you know. But before leaving Scotland yesterday, I met with the president of the European Investment Bank. I want to thank the European Investment Bank. I want to thank the European Union ambassador, who actually is here to Barbados, who is here with us now in Brussels. And why? You see that place called Harrison's Point? We are about to get a loan from the European Investment Bank for 60 million US dollars, some of which will be retroactively applied to the money spent to convert Harrison's Point last February, March. And those are the things, and that loan has exceedingly generous terms because there's a 5-year moratorium. In other words, we don't pay nothing for the 5 years. Then it is a 20-year loan. So the first 5 years you pay nothing, 15 years remaining you pay, but we're paying at, I think it's 1.25%. That the interest rate is. And anybody who knows anything, that is like the kind of rates we pay at the IMF, which is almost next kin to nothing compared to the 10 and 13% that we were paying when we were going to the markets under the last government, because of how little confidence people had in our ability to manage our affairs. We had other bilateral meetings, and in coming to Brussels, the purpose of coming to Brussels was to have met with the Vice President of the European Commission, Mr. Frans Timmermans, who is a former Foreign Minister of the Netherlands, and who we have had initial discussions with before coming to Brussels, of course, and therefore we came to be able to cement our positions, particularly as it relates to the climate crisis, because he is the European Commission's lead on climate. But also, we were able to do interviews, and I'm sure that you can get access to them earlier today with Reuters on this issue of climate and trying to put in context what has to happen if we are going to see progress for small island states, see Barbados being able to access both grant funding as well as new instruments to allow our private sector to participate, as well as the debt that we still need to be able to get access to in order to be able to meet our obligations to our people at home. After that, we also met with our financial advisors here in Brussels. As you know, we are still ever present dealing with issues pertaining to the listing with respect to tax and with respect to anti-money laundering and terrorism financing, whether it is the OECD, the Financial Action Task Force, and correspondingly with the European Union. Those issues continue to be of concern to us. But we are also looking to see how best we can play a slightly different and take a slightly different approach, because there are some issues that are of mutual concern to us with respect to how money and people are taxed. We all go on the internet now, and we all know that there's something called geographically mobile money. And why? Before you used to go into town at Cave Shepherd or go in Swan Street and buy something. Now people go on Amazon, and when you go on Amazon or when you go on these other platforms, then the ability to be able to tax becomes much more difficult because of how they domicile themselves. We have benefited from being able to have an international financial services sector, and we've made the point that we cannot easily adjust without being able to work out how and what we're doing, because we realize that the taxation is now attaching itself to consumers as opposed to where things are produced. And that is going to be another battle that we have to fight beyond the pandemic and beyond the climate crisis. I want to come home now to the issue and to give you the assurance that over the course of the last few days as well, technology is a wonderful thing. I've been in contact with the acting Prime Minister on a daily basis with respect to what we're doing, especially as it relates to COVID. I'm aware last night when persons were being decamped and people moving in, we've completed the conversion of the tertiary building at Harrison's Point. We have not yet received the oxygen plants for there, but we are using individual oxygen bottles and concentrators. Until the plants come in, I believe that the shipping for those will be in a week or so. And there was a delay on the medical gas devices because of a component. Typical story again, we're hearing it. Because of the breakdown in supply and logistics globally, the medical gas plant was waiting on a part and may not come now until close to the end of November. Without prejudice to that, Dr. Ford and his team have given us the assurance that they are in a position still to meet the needs. And that tertiary building is now a kind of primary secondary. So we have the original primary that had 38 beds. We have the original secondary that we turned into a primary facility with dedicated oxygen and capacity. That was another 42 beds, 42 beds. And now we have this new tertiary where the downstairs floor will have 48 beds with dedicated oxygen capacity again. And upstairs will be a kind of new secondary with 56 beds that will not have the dedicated oxygen supply of downstairs, but they will have at least 10 of the 56 beds with oxygen concentrators being used. I'm in a position to speak to these things because I want to thank both Acting Prime Minister Bradshaw and Minister of Health Jeffrey Bostic, who continue to be on the front line of helping us, and also Dr. Ford and the others. I want to make some things clear too. A lot of what is being viewed as political decisions is the collective decision of the medical and also the policy people. And to that extent, therefore, those who find it in their mouth to be able to talk glibly about the fact that the government is putting at risk and not locking down, et cetera, continue to avoid the fact that Barbados is not a one-issue country, and that therefore what we've had to do is to engage with others to see how best we keep the balance. And to that extent, that's why we've been begging people, if you're feeling ill, pick up the phone and call and go And as I said on the last time that I spoke, there are still a few too many people saying, I don't want my parents to go and take this medication, or I don't want my parent to be put on a ventilator, to be intubated. I mean, please. But you know what? There are consequences to actions. I don't know how much more some people will have to see to appreciate that there are consequences to actions. Against that backdrop, I'm happy that the Pfizer vaccines, PS, will be available when, if in the next day or two, or they've arrived already. And Prime Minister today, Prime Minister Bradshaw, Acting Prime Minister Bradshaw, will therefore accept them on our behalf. But that is a direct result of the meeting with Vice President Harris, where we had to explain to her that we could no longer wait for receipt of them. And I want to publicly thank Vice President Harris and her office for engaging in as quick a way to make sure that the Pfizer vaccines are available. I said it last week in a branch meeting, Beijing's like brand name. To that extent, therefore, we really needed to be able to get that on the ground in order to be able to boost the vaccination numbers. Because the bottom line is, and I met the Prime Minister of Iceland the night before, and we discussed it. You heard me talk about Iceland all last year, earlier this year, because Iceland has one of the highest vaccination rates. It's about the same size as Barbados, just marginally bigger. It's been able to keep its deaths down because it was able to get a higher penetration level of vaccinations at an earlier level. It is the reason why Barbados's own death rate is less than most other countries in the region. But for us, that's no badge of honor, because for every person that dies, it is literally felt by all of us, because we know that, look, if people could take the vaccinations, then they're in a better position to survive. I'm not going to repeat myself now about why we're not mandating, but I think I've told you over and over that in a small state of 166 square miles, that's not on, and we can't enforce it, full stop. So you don't undermine the rule of law when the rule of law and social capital is the only thing that we have literally keeping us alive. So my friends, I've talked long, but deliberately so, and I'll stop here to take some questions. But I want us to know, I used to say, and I share this at a very personal level, that I wanted to be born at a time in the heady days of the colonial struggle and coming into independence, because there was a sense of being there in the excitement of forging a nation and being able to be part of that and building a nation. Came into public life 30 years ago. Never in our wildest dreams did we anticipate that we would be at a moment such as this, where our very survival has not to be taken for granted, but to be worked for day by day by day. It's not that we can't survive, but it is that we must work every day to guarantee our survival and to build our prosperity. And I want to make it clear, this is not the work of government alone. This is the work of all of us as Caribbean people and all of us within our respective island nations, or I shouldn't say island nations, nation states, because Suriname and Guyana have seen some of the worst floods that they have seen in decades. Trinidad has been the victim of some flooding that would make your head go round, and landslides. So this is not only about those of us in the hurricane belt. I acknowledge that we're going to have to speak like parrots. Owen Arthur used to tell me, Mottley, politics is the art of repetition. And if you're going to change behavior, you're going to have to repeat yourself over and over and over. But I want the country to know that it is not just the work of government, that it is going to be the work of every Barbadian and every Barbadian institution to help us turn this journey. I said today in Brussels that 10 to 12 years is a hell of a short time to be able to do this adjustment. I said it every day in Glasgow. There are some developments that might require me to have, and we are literally dealing with this as we go forward, that may require that I may have to be back up here or to stay on. with respect to the COP26. And when that becomes clearer, I'll let the country know. But I'd like to pause at this stage to be able to take some questions. And members, and Sharon, you're there from GIS, I accept that we may have to break this down and be able to play it back in different bite-sized chunks for Bajans, because this is not now about anything other than mobilizing a nation to protect its future and to make sure that every Bajan, right-thinking Bajan, can play their part in this respect. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. As customary, I would kindly ask members of the media to identify themselves before posing their questions.
Prime Minister, good afternoon. Gercine Carter, Nation News. You gave a very impassioned speech. Sorry, you were saying something?
No, I was saying thank you, Gercine.
You're welcome. You gave a very impassioned speech at the opening. How do you feel about the response to the things you said and the issues that you highlighted from the developed countries? What has been their response in your private conversations with them?
As I said, I think we're beginning to see some movement on the needle. And remember, in my UNGA, I use that analogy as the needle moving. The question is that we're seeing the movement. I'm not sure that it is yet enough movement. And that is why we feel in our diplomatic discussions, both publicly and privately, that now is not the time to lift your foot from the accelerator, and that there's a moment in time that we need to be able to close the deal. Can we close the deal as we best want it, which is to keep within 1.5? Not sure, but we're trying. But can we close the deal on making sure that we have the framework to be able to adapt so that we don't have to view climate refugees? Remember, Montserrat used to have enough people. 2/3 of the people who lived on Montserrat no longer live there. Remember, Barbuda had a good set of people before Hurricane Maria. A lot of people have not relocated back to Barbuda or to Dominica. So in short answer, it's very much still a work in progress. I know that the UN Secretary General believes, as do others, that we're going to have to continue to monitor this even after COP on a yearly basis, and that certainly there has to be a major stock taken by 2023. Now that tells you that this thing is real. And there's a wonderful little video that the UN has done with a dinosaur, reminding us how he became extinct, and saying that the difference is that he didn't have control over the meteor crashing into the earth, but the earth has control over what it does now to be able to stop this calamity from affecting us.
With regard to the plans to become fossil-free energy, you know what I mean, by 2030. I'm wondering, what is your plan for the diesel and gas operated, phasing out diesel and gas operated vehicles in Barbados, the importation of these vehicles?
Two things, Gerson. I should have said just now that because of that thing still being a work in progress, maybe why I have to be back in Glasgow next week rather than otherwise. But I'll come back to that when we have more details. As it relates to the transitioning of the vehicles, government has already taken a decision that for the procurement of government vehicles, we are buying electric or hybrid, and we're still now doing the research on hydrogen. It's too early for us to make a determination on that. And this is where I say that we don't have enough consultant advisors. And I want to say to all who say that we have too many, believe you me, Barbados needs help on technical areas. And if we get bogged down with our own voices, we're not going to be able to do the things or have access to the advice that we need to transition. With respect to the rest of the economy, clearly we are going to have to be importing more and more vehicles that are compliant. We're now reviewing our tax policy on them again with respect to the electric vehicles. We're also doing the work on how do we replace the fuel tax, because obviously if you're no longer having fossil fuel vehicles, we're going to have to find a way of replacing that source of revenue for fuel taxes. And then the third component, which is problematic, is supply. We don't manufacture cars. don't. So that part of the difficulty has been the developing world's access, not just Barbados, to cars. And the reality is that in the last 2, 3 decades, there has been a determination on the part of the developed world to be able to send down their reconditioned cars, as you know, which is a difficult decision because a fellow who never had a car before wants a car. But by the same token, where is the discussion having to take place? We're talking next year about, and we've been having preliminary discussions with all of the stakeholders about how best, one, we convert our public service vehicles into different forms of energy in the same way that the government. Barbados is now the largest holder of electric buses in the Caribbean with 49 electric buses. We also are trying to look and see at the conversion kits process because we recognize that not everybody is going to be able to go and afford to be able to buy a new electric vehicle or forget the hydrogen or LPG powered vehicles. Just so. And to that extent, therefore, we need to be able to see what opportunities there are to transition people. Some of this will affect our taxes, and therefore the next few months' work is to be able to see how we can do the adjustment while providing that opportunity. There is a perspective, and it is a long-term behavior, or I shouldn't say long-term, because there's nothing long about 10 years, but there's a medium-term behavior modification issue that we're going to have to discuss straight with Bajans. How do we walk more? How do we carpool more? How do we use more public transport rather than ourselves using only individual cars powered by gasoline or diesel? And this is the reality of changing how we live. I'm sorry.
Mhm. Secondly, I know you said that this is all in the discussion phase, but can you expand on the plans for the desalinated plants and for the proposed wind farms?
Yeah. On the desal plants, look, the last government signed 2 contracts just before they lost the government. And in both instances, they signed for a capacity that was way in excess of what the Water Authority could take or use now. But in spite of that, the government would be on the hook to pay for the full output, take or pay. Okay? And in fairness, the take or pay approach is commonly used in utilities and was used, I think, even with the ionics plant. The problem is that the exposure for the volume of water was way too much. So we've said, look, let's play our hearts to wisdom, come back. We can't afford that, and we ain't doing that. And that has been the government's position for the last 2 years or 2.5 years. We said we will renegotiate with you because we accept that at some point in the future, we're going to need to augment our sources of water. Part of the problem with desalination and reverse osmosis is that you lose a lot of water as well, and you use a lot of electricity. So we have to get it right. The government was looking at the time at a plant in the north and a plant in the south. The one in the south, it looks like that rather than salt water, it looks as though it may well even be brackish water, which is good news because the ionics plant is, as you know, even though we call it a desalination plant, it is really dealing with brackish water as opposed to straight salt water. The temporary plants that were put in place by the last government at the Hope, I think in St. Lucia, has been salt water. We recognize, and the last government tried to do 2 temporary desal plants and 2 permanent desal plants. The second temporary desal plant, even though the equipment was bought, never became operational. The government has taken a decision to move that second plant from Trent's and to put all of the temporary plants in St. Lucie. I think at Colleton is one, and the Hope, as I said, was the other one that pre-existed. We've also taken decisions that we have to conclude the discussions and the renegotiations, both on quantum and on pricing and a few other contractual terms. That process is not easy because you're asking people to walk away from what they think are their rights and for us to walk into something that we think we can afford and that we can manage. And that's why it's taken as long as it does. And we've had to pull together a team of negotiators that are not necessarily public servants alone. The public servants are critical to it, but we also need people who are versed in utility negotiations people who are versed in finance, people who are versed in legal aspects of utilities law. So that's where we are on those. I anticipate that it will probably be another, what, 2-3 months before those discussions can finish. And then hopefully we will be able to see how soon we can get them on stream, probably another 12 to 18 months before they fully come. That's why the temporary plants are so important to bridge that gap to the permanent.
Mhm. Um,
Sorry, you had asked, it was
that's fine. And the
you
wind,
had said something, the wind farm, right?
yes.
We did a study and we received a study that literally looked at what was required for Barbados to have functional wind farms offshore. And as you know, wind farms can be on fixed platforms or floating platforms. One of the concerns was always, but how are you going to have a wind farm out there and a hurricane come and knock it down? Well, we've also been able to identify that in Vanuatu, they have retractable wind farms in the water. Denmark and the United Kingdom, you can do your own research, are two global leaders with respect to wind farms. We don't have the technical assistance, the technical capacity, sorry, but we want the technical assistance. And we're not too proud to say we don't know, must never be. And therefore we've said, look, we accept that they're likely to be up at least 3 of these offshore wind farms. We've asked the World Bank, the International Financial Corporation, which is the private sector arm of the World Bank, to help us manage the procurement of that in the same way they're helping us with the Grantley Adams Airport procurement now. Bottom line, and if that's management, that's not the assets for those who want to be wicked and mischievous. Bottom line is that in order for us to be able to even know and do what we need to do, we believe that the partnership with other countries will allow us to be able to do so. Do we have an MOU with them yet? No, we do not. But are these the persons with whom we are speaking? Yes. Do I keep secrets? No. So therefore, guess what? We've had 2 or 3 discussions with the Prime Minister of Denmark, formally and informally, and only this week on Monday evening, Prime Minister Johnson and I have addressed it. And of course, as you know, President Kenyatta was in Barbados, and we were together again this week again, and able to continue. And Kenya has one of the highest levels of renewable energy effective use in Africa. So we feel that we can come together and use this first project to be able to build and boost Barbados's technical capacity, while at the same time creating opportunities for Barbadian pension funds, Barbadian investors. We've talked about unit trust. People feel it didn't come in, but quite frankly, may I remind us that for the last 21 months, we've been managing a pandemic too. And therefore, there are some things that I would have liked to have completed beforehand, but has taken a little longer because we've had to stop and divert our attention to other things. But if we don't pause and get back fully on stream, tell me how you can make your date with destiny in 10 to 12 years' time, especially with events happening along the way, month by month.
Mm-hmm. And finally, COVID-19. Are you satisfied with the recent response of Barbadians to vaccination?
Not fully. No, honestly, not fully. I beg you now. And I am too proud to be able to say that we need to. Look, I don't know what else to say or do to let Bajans know that there's a direct correlation for the most part between vaccination and survival. That doesn't mean that there may not be 1 or 2 persons who have succumbed, unfortunately, because of pre-existing conditions, whether it is heart or cancer or whatever, that really, when you think about it and look at it, those persons would have been compromised to be able to fight and to live even without COVID. The 99.9% of the persons who have passed, regrettably, have been people who have been unvaccinated. And the second component of it is people who wait too late to say that they need help. Because as Dr. Ford keeps reminding us, I can be good with you now. Next thing you know, in a half hour, oxygen sats that are at 98 or 97 down to 92 and 91. And if you beat and get to 90 and 89, Papa, yo, look for help. And if you come too late, you're then asking the doctors to perform Herculean task. And I don't know how many different ways to say it. I think that Gertrude, part of the issue, Gertrude, sorry, part of the issue is us also finding non-traditional means. That's why I've been on the ground at home so much, going into small communities. And that's why I've appealed from the opposition right back to the church, to everyone, that every Barbadian has to play their part now in making sure that each person accepts personal responsibility for their lives. Why? Because at the end of the day, this pandemic is becoming endemic. Full stop. It's going to be with us. And in the same way, we got to accept responsibility for not catching dengue or for doing the things not to catch the flu or other things in terms of chronic NCDs. We're going to have to accept responsibility now to do the things to protect our individual lives. As much as my mother loved me, she can't protect me. The only body that can protect me is me.
Are you considering lifting some of the restrictions in the near future?
No, we've said so because we have to get back to being able to function. Look, Barbados's unemployment rate went sky high. We had almost, over 50,000 claims last year for unemployment benefit. Those persons, and let me put it into context, we have about 20,000 people out of 275 to 80,000 people who have had COVID. It's 20,000 people too many. But what does that mean? That there are 250, 260,000 people who've never had it. Of that 250, 260,000, a large number of them were the ones who were hoping to get unemployment benefit beyond because of the decimation of the tourism sector and then the extension to which has affected farming and retail and other parts of the economy. So that when you hear us talk about lockdown fatigue as well, it is because people want to be able to work. It is because not only that they want to go to Lime and Fed, I'm sure they want to do that too, but the major reason is that households want to be able to support themselves again. And therefore, we have to find that delicate balance that will allow people who have taken the vaccination, which is now almost what? We're near 150,000 people? 149,355. That's an amazing achievement. And that is 65% of all those eligible to take the vaccine. That's 2 out of every 3 people in Barbados over 12. 2 out of every 3 people over 12 have taken responsibility for their lives and said, I'm going to take it. On top of that, we've said, keep your mask on. We're not removing mask wearing. On top of that, we've said, keep sanitizing. Your hands get a little dry, but use a little cream in between. And on top of that, we've said, don't go up underneath people all the time. And that's why we say, if you're going in a rum shop, go outside and drink. Don't stand inside the shop and up underneath people and drink. And why? You and I both know that you can talk till the cows come home. You can't tell people that they got to literally stand in a house 24/7 because they're not going to do it. And Barbados only has how many police officers to go and help, and how many people in the COVID monitoring unit to go and do it. So what we have to do is to teach our people how to live with it and how to manage life so that they can still buy food, so that they can still pay rent and don't be evicted, so that they can still pay a mortgage and don't get foreclosure because they don't have all of a sudden no job. And that is why we've said that we recognize that we need to create these safe zones, because even though we want people to take vaccinations, we accept that there are few people who can't do it for medical reasons, and there are few people who literally want to be able to deal with the reality that this is my philosophical view. Power to you, my brother. Power to you, my sister. So for your employment, the government has taken a position in the public sector that we're not going to stop you from living. But you see, in healthcare institutions, you need to therefore test if you're not taking it. And not us, but the medical people have come up with a framework for how often you test. Look, you say here in Europe, you know that I could not go to a single meeting in Glasgow without being tested every single morning before going there. You know that for me to go and meet with the president of the United States of America and the president of the European Union and all the others, they too, everybody had to be tested. Similarly, when we were in Washington, D.C., and when we were at the United Nations, same thing again. So that all we are doing, and the difference with Barbados is this: I ain't asking Bajans to go and pay for the test. We are making the test publicly available to Bajans. Now, if you're talking about fetting, and if you're talking about sports and leisure time activities, then we may not be able to carry that weight for you. And I've been honest about that. And similarly, if you're talking about schools, school children are accustomed to vaccinations. I said so, and we know the exception. So that's where we are. And look, something can happen to me tomorrow, you know. If something happened to me tomorrow or something happened to the government tomorrow, you still got to face the same reality. And there's no getting around it because the pandemic don't have no color. It don't have no form. We can't find where it is. We just know that it's out there. And the only way you can protect it is by vaccinating yourself, by masking, by sanitizing, and by distancing. There is no rocket science.
Any thoughts on this? Is my final question. Sorry.
That's all right there. Have a ball, because the truth is that I really ain't got much more to do this evening except sleep. And I did a little bit of that, but have a ball. I'm not putting a cap on you.
Any thoughts?
Yeah, I have a dinner with the director of the International Cooperation of the European Union. Yeah. So, but I'm taking my time because I'm moved to be able to explain, because the truth is that this is now a new reality, and that's why I said at the Chamber of Commerce, change our mental landscape. Sorry, Gracie.
Yeah, I was asking any projection on when the curfew may be lifted?
And honestly, that we want to get literally to a point that is comfortable. And the doctors are trying to advise us, balancing back out. What we want to do first is to extend before lifting. And I think we are close to extending. In fact, I've had and received some information and advice that we can't only look at the vaccinated people, but we now have to also look at those who have antibodies, because effectively it is both the vaccinated people and the persons who've had it with the antibodies that are more or less protected. And it is against that backdrop that our first destination point will be to carry, hopefully, the curfew to 11 o'clock or midnight. I don't want to pronounce on it today, but I'm in the process of having a conversation. And conversations mean that you have to share. After the point of 11 or midnight, I think when we reach closer to that ultimate threshold, whether that threshold is 75% or 80% of the eligible population, I'm waiting to find out, but that is when we would like to remove the restrictions completely. What I can say to you is that the tourism people are in London as well. The forward bookings look very good. It's up to Barbadians to determine what kind of future we want. Do we want to earn again, or do we want to be on the back foot waiting for people to hand out charity? And that's the simple truth.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
But we control how fast we open back up. And the more people we can vaccinate and the closer we can get to those targets, both in terms of relaxation first and then elimination completely, is in the hands of all of us collectively. So the fella on the block who feel that he really ain't got the power, my man, you got so much power you don't even know. The girl who is in the hairdressing salon, you got more power than you think you know. The one who in the nation behind you, girl, seen down in the press room, them got real power behind you. The fella who's the mechanic, same thing. Let's get real. And we've seen one or two mechanics die. We've seen all kinds of people, managers die. We've seen all kinds of people being affected. How much more do people need to see to know that if we can close the gap, and Corey Ford said it well, his challenge, November 15th, we still got 11 days to that. If we help get close to that challenge, then we can look at 11 o'clock midnight by that time. And I hope that we will apply our hearts to wisdom and do it.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Gerson. I'll just ask other members of the media if they too have questions at this time.
One question in relation to the introduction of the safe zones. Prime Minister, how soon can we see the safe zones roll out? I know the original date given was November 1st.
I remember last week at the press conference, at the Chamber of Commerce, I indicated that there would have to be a delay largely because we weren't only dealing with public sector entities, but also private sector entities, nursing homes. In fact, the last report I got was whether we would include the Cancer Society, the Diabetes Foundation, those institutions that see a lot of people on a daily basis for free or for next kin to nothing to help in the delivery of public health. The Attorney General and the Minister of Health are hoping that it is imminent for the healthcare sector. I've said as well that because of the slip, we need to move as quickly as possible. So I really expect momentarily to be able to see the directive, if it hasn't been done today, with respect to healthcare, and that within another week to 2 weeks, we will see the protective services and the tourism sector there. On a parallel track, we met last week with members of the private sector, and they have indicated their desire as well to be able to put things on the table for other areas of safe zone. We said to them, give it to us, but we have to consult with the labor movement and the medical fraternity to see where we settle on that. So this is very much a work in progress, and this is one of the consequences of smallness. It's the same people doing everything. It's not an excuse, but it is our reality. So we're very much, it's very much a work in progress, but we're not fully there yet.
Yeah, did you have a follow-up? Sorry, Prime Minister. Go ahead, Prime Minister.
I was only going to say that we need to get it as right as possible, which is why we've been taking a little longer than would normally have been the case.
Aaliyah, did you have a follow-up? Sorry.
I have a question in relation to COP. Prime Minister Mottley, I want to know how confident you are in the world's ability to cut emissions by 2030, given that the largest producers of emissions, China and Russia, were absent from this year's summit.
Yeah. When I come home, I'm going to give you all some materials to read too, because we're in danger of accepting that it's only the largest emitters, but it's also the largest ones with stock. How confident are we? It's obviously regrettable that China and Russia weren't there, but I think that they too accept that they're part of humanity, and that they too accept that it's not going to choose which part of the world to hit alone. I'm confident that at some point they'll do it. The question is, will they do it in time for us? That's really the issue. So I'm confident that they will come around. I'm not confident that it will necessarily be in time for small island developing states, and that's the truth. That's why the movement on adaptation funds is so critical for us, because without the money to do the coastal works and the drainage and the water and all of those things, you're going to really see trouble about it. I want, remind me before I finish, Lisa, to address an issue related to something that also came out of the discussions with the Vice President and with the Americans generally, that we've tried in recalibrating our relationship to be able to address. But go ahead.
Are there any further questions?
Hi, good afternoon. Ms. Ron Robinson here from Capital Media. Prime Minister Mottley, you spoke extensively of dedicated plans on a macro level to assist in making those changes to the climate, but what would be in the pipeline on a micro level for Barbadians to assist in making those changes daily, other than, the sensitizing Barbadians via the media channels?
Well, I thought I said some of them. I talked about the need for us to determine whether we're going to start carpooling and using more public transport and being able to change how we move. I talked about us being able to be responsible for our own food and nutritional security. So if you've got 2 tires in your yard, put some soil in it and start growing some food, and don't only look at what you can buy in the supermarket and the market. I talked about the need for us to make sure that when we're brushing our teeth, that we turn off the water, or that we have shorter showers. There's a whole host of things for behavior modification. And quite frankly, I hope that Mr. Ellis and the Public Affairs Unit and the various other agencies in government will be able to start the communication for us to change our behavior, not only to make us less susceptible to catching COVID, but also for us to be able to control, for example, how we ourselves need to minimize our carbon footprint, how we ourselves need to protect ourselves with the chronic NCDs that are making us more vulnerable to COVID, how we need to change our mindset, as I said to the Chamber of Commerce, to go out there beyond Barbados and earn and export, because we can't win this battle by just selling things in Bridgetown or in St. Lucie or in St. Peter. You need to go to the other islands, you need to go to the States, you need to go to UAE, you need to go to Africa, you need to learn some Spanish and go down to Latin America and start trading there. And the private sector is learning this now, even in terms of sourcing food, because of the difficulties and the disruption of the supply chain and the increase in prices for both shipping as well as for access to commodities. And then we need to also change our behavior in terms of how we relate to each other. We know that violence is a problem. We know that abuse is a problem. We know that guns is a problem. So when I look at those 5 things, I really am asking for a reset. And that's why I said that as much as I wanted to be in the heady days, or our government, I know Jerome feels the same way, Dale, a number of us, in the heady days of independence, we find ourselves now in the heady days of trying to preserve and survive the nation state called Barbados, and the nation states of the Caribbean and the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. And those were battles that when we entered public life 25, 30 years ago, we did not fully appreciate that we would have to face. So we know this, that no amount of government policy alone will save us. It is behavior modification and that wonderful Bajan phrase, one blow is kill old cow. And if each of us can play our part, and then those who have a larger role to play theirs, then we can make it and we can have the prosperity. At the same time, you hear me talk about the challenges. You haven't heard me talk about the opportunities. You see this thing called technology? We're in a position to do so much, and that's why we've launched the initiative called Future Barbados that takes young people to say, how can we reduce childhood obesity by 50% in 5 years' time? How can we use more digital processing in order to be able to make Barbados more effective and efficient at reaching markets anywhere in the world? Okay, I can go on and on. How can we make Barbadians bilingual at the very least by 2030? Every Bajan under the age of 18, even if not the older ones, so that they can go and find work and market opportunities in Central America and Latin America? How can we open up opportunities to Africa that has the largest number of persons under the age of 25, a demographic dividend that, quite frankly, with us as underpopulated countries, we're going to need to be able to exploit.
Just one.
But I'm available to talk to you more at home if you want more information at a personal level, my dear.
One other quick question, a bit mischievous. I noticed you met with Prince Charles. Did the question of the Republic come up?
Of course, but I tell you, hold tight. Hold tight, my dear. Prince Charles has been a friend of Barbados. And in fact, I'll use this opportunity to deprecate those parts of the British press who tried to say what I was doing and that I was, snubbing or ignoring Prince Charles by looking into my phone. You know what I was writing in my phone? I was writing 2 sentences for my speech so I didn't forget them. You understand? That's all I was doing. But I think that we are in a good place, and let's see how the next few weeks unfold.
Did he bring it up? Did he mention it?
I don't know who mentioned it. We discussed it. I can't remember who mentioned it, but we're in a good place, believe you me. Trust me on that.
Thoughts on it with me?
Christina, there we can talk about it soon. I promise you, as soon as I come home, we can talk about it. That's a deal?
That's a deal. That's a deal.
Promise. And I've said it in front of everybody so that you know that you can hold me to it.
Okay. But that's for me or for everybody? This discussion.
It's for you. It's for you, because you were bold enough to do it. You were bold enough to ask. I promise the others that I'll discuss behavior modification with them and other things.
Are there any further questions?
You won't get upset if I do it with them.
Are there any further questions?
After.
I think we will be rolling out the activities for the Republic probably in the next by next week. Okay. Once we fine tune most of them, but we're in good shape. We're in good shape.
That would your rolling out include details about whether we are having an independence parade or not?
Yeah, everything.
Okay.
We'll get that. And we're doing things sensitive to the COVID but also reflecting the moment in time. And as I said in the debate for the election of the president, when your newspaper carried the headline, "Why now?" I've told you why now. There is no other opportune time for us to deal with the starting of the behavior modification of the country. 1st of December, this is not about November 30th, this is about the 1st of December. And I've been trying to share the information in each speech, in each conversation with the country, to say it is not business as usual. That's why we've given the targets at Glasgow that by 2030, we will remove fossil fuel driven electricity as far as possible. We will have still some limited natural gas, which is why we say 95%, I think, for redundancy if things break down. Similarly, and that is because there is still a transition point. We can't twiddle our nose and be there overnight. And secondly, we recognize that as we go forward, we're going to also have to find ways of keeping households and families alive. And that's why I'm happy. I think there's some limited opportunities. I think there are 50 before the end of this year and 200 in January for some of the tourism workers to go into the United States of America under, I'm not sure if it's the HB2 visa. I can't remember the name of the visa, but it's a specific visa. And our office in Miami has been working assiduously to help back up those opportunities while we get our own hotel and tourism sector back up to where we wanted it to be. The speculation globally is that it's probably 2023, 2024 before you see it back to full throttle again. But I know Bajans, we like a challenge, and I feel that we can set ourselves the challenge of getting there before 2023. And if you look at the October numbers and you look at the September numbers, you're beginning to see it trend upwards. And secondly, you also would have seen that we have KLM coming in now, and in fact also Aer Lingus. I traveled up here to Aer Lingus on Saturday, and it was a very good flight. And of course, we need to see the resumption of Lufthansa as well going forward. So as we speak, the others are at the world travel market, and I'm confident that Barbados will see improvement in both numbers and airlift. And I said, we have welcomed our new CEO to the Barbados Tourism Marketing Inc. And I'm very clear, a country that has spent time exporting skills. Sir George Allen was the head of the Pan American Health Organization. There are Bajans who were close at the head of 3M Corporation internationally. There are Bajans who head up, I just told you, Selwyn Hart is where he is as a UN Special Advisor. For us to use nationality to stop people from helping us in our most critical of areas is to have a form of myopia that long belongs to the last century and will get us nowhere going forward. And we may disagree on some things, but the government has made a determination that if it was good enough for us to have a non-Barbadian as Minister of Tourism in the 1970s in the form of Peter Morgan, who was not born in Barbados, then it cannot be a problem for us to engage now, not as minister, but as a chief executive officer, 40, 50 years later, a man not born in Barbados, but who brings to the table not just his expertise, but his network.
Are there any further questions at this time? If there are no further questions, Prime Minister, you wanted to elaborate on talks you had with the U.S. Vice President, I believe.
I actually did just now. And it's an area, clearly Americans have to provide jobs for Americans first. But wherever there are shortages that allow us to be able to have Barbadians benefit as we build back our economy, and let me put it in context, losing 17, 18% of output last year, and Kevin Greenwich and Ryan Strawn have said it over and over, meant that we lost almost $2 billion Barbados dollars in economic activity. You know where that put us back to? That put us back to what we were producing in 2006, okay? But in nominal terms, in real terms, it put us back to the 1990s when I became a minister of government. And that is why you see us fighting as hard as we do. And how did we get there? Not because of anything we did. In fact, had we not completed our debt restructuring the month before COVID, I simply do not know where we would be today. And thank God for completing that, both domestic and international debt restructuring. And that's why the international community continues to have confidence in our economic management. That's why our bonds are trading over par. In other words, over 100%. We thought we could use the difference. We thought that once we restructured our debt, that our bonds would be trading at 80 cents in the dollar or 75 cents in the dollar, and that we would use the difference in order to be able to finance marine conservation with a debt for nature swap. Well, it didn't happen. So we now had to do something different and work with the Inter-American Development Bank and Nature Conservancy, where we will be looking to buy back $100 million of our own debt, refinance it at cheaper terms, and then use the difference and put it in a trust to be able to protect the oceans so that the children of those people in coastal communities will know what it is to enjoy both livelihood as well as recreation in the beaches off the West Coast, the South Coast, the North Coast, and even the East Coast.
Did you have
Thank
any?
you.
Did you have any further comments, PM?
No, I think that you probably tell me I talk too much, no? But you can't win in this game called public life. You know, there's those who say, I hear a man say that I jet setting. If jet setting is not getting the sleep and not getting the food, well, I don't know what that is. But believe you me, this has been hardcore work. And secondly, that we have to make every day count now as Bajans, every single day in the next 10 to 12 years. And as Martin Luther King would say, I may not be with you at the end of the journey, but I am with you at the beginning. And we're going to make this work because this is now our reality. And as President Biden said to us on Tuesday in the small meeting we had, that his backyard is now his front yard, and that this is personal for all of us.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. The Honorable Mia Amor Mottley, who joined us virtually from Brussels as she attends COP26. Members of the media and you for joining. Do have yourself a wonderful afternoon.